Now the basics of socialization developmental theories. Piaget is one of our first theorists. He studied cognition, how people think and understand and process information. He looked at various stages of development, sensory motor stage, where you're touching and feeling, and that's how you understand the world. Pre-operational stage, beginning to learn to use language and symbols. Concrete operational stage, 7 to 11. You can think of this as the elementary school years where you're learning a whole bunch of different words. You're learning the parts of speech. You're learning multiplication and division and addition and subtraction. But you're not doing algebra, right? You're not writing 5-paragraph essays. You're not coming up with thesis statements. You're just concrete. Everything is concrete. Then you get to formal operational stage, 12 plus. That's when they introduce the abstract critical thinking that allows you to do things like algebra. Imagine that a letter holds a space for a number that we don't know yet. We have to do a whole bunch of stuff. And then we eventually figure out what that letter means. So concrete operational stage will set you up for that, teach you things like A plus B is the same as B plus A. But it's not until we get to be at least 12 that we can hold on to that kind of concept, or hold on to a concept like symbolic interactionism, any of those, or functionalism. Most of sociology requires formal operational stage at the very least. Brazelton takes on infant temperament. We have looked at the importance of socialization and the interactions that we have with people in order to form ourselves. And all he really does is say that children come in a little bit pre-wired. They are not lumps of dough that we can form into whatever we want to. Some of them are way more intense. I've had a couple intense ones. Some of them fall asleep all by themselves for like 20 hours a day. Had one of those too. Had a slow to warm. They are different. They come into this world different from each other, their own beings. And that starts the interaction process. How do you interact with that colicky little mess of a child who screams and spits for about 6 months straight? Also known as my oldest child. Not my oldest child, my youngest child. My oldest one was screaming but not spitting. My youngest one was screaming and spitting. Lovely child, but she's 13 now. We are almost over that, as you can tell. So the temperament, that activity level, that adaptation, that mood, whether they sleep or don't sleep, whether they're positive or negative when you introduce new change to them, whether they're predictable or unpredictable, all of these things are kind of pre-wired in the human. And then that human comes into a society, and that human has to then interact with a family, and then interact with the school, and then interact with everybody else for the rest of their life. So we don't want to get rid of the biology completely, and we bring in the infant temperament studies to show that. Our last developmental theorist is Erik Erikson. He is a psychosocial development modeler. He looks at how we develop ourselves, our sense of selves, our human potential through interactions with other people in very specific stages. And it's almost set up like a video game. You have a challenge, and then you meet it or you don't meet it. And if you don't meet it, you're kind of stuck there. I mean, your age might go to the next stage, but in your self-development, you're still there. So if you think about the world of development in 8 stages, from birth to death, and each one of these outcomes gets a little bit gloomier. We start out with trust versus mistrust, and you'll see where we end up. So he's a little bit more useful, though, if you're going to have children. Freud is not particularly useful. Piaget is kind of fun. Mead, you can mess with people a little bit. But Erikson is actually useful in your everyday life because he shows what the goal is for each developmental stage. So infancy, it's trust. A child has to have a basic trust in their environment. If they're crying, somebody will come within a reasonable time and pick them up and play with them, change their diaper, give them food, give them attention, whatever it is that they need. Whenever they need something, somebody will come within a reasonable time to deliver that to the child. Now we can go back to Brazelton and say, well, what if it's a high-need, difficult little mess of a child? Well, then you might have to move a little faster, right? So stage 1 just kind of shows that you have to make the child trust the world. And most of you are going to be the kind of decent parents that are going to do this. So we're going to pretty much do this unless we are horribly neglectful to our kids. We will be building in them a sense of trust in the world. Then we go to toddlerhood, or about the time that they can take off and run, and they want to be autonomous. They want to do it all by myself, which you never hear from a toddler ever. You never hear no, you never hear all by myself. So they want to do basic life skills, eating by themselves, walking by themselves, running by themselves, using the bathroom, all those basic daily living things. They want to do it. And you want them to be able to do that in order to go to the next stage. They have to have that autonomy to develop initiative. So in preschool, that's the initiative years. I can do it. My teacher tells me what to do, and I can do it. I see something to play with, and I'm going to go over there and I'm going to play with it. I'm going to go back to Mead and say, I'm going to go be somebody. I see all the things I can put on and be a dog, and I'm going to go be a dog. That's preschool, that initiative. They also trash your house. That's not necessarily the best stage either. They will decide they want to clean by putting everything into your washer. Not always helpful. But you have to have initiative. Or what happens when they go to school and are sitting in first grade, kindergarten, and the teacher gives them a piece of paper and walks away, gives them a few directions? They have to start. They have to figure out how to start and feel self-confident enough to start, because those elementary school years are industriousness. We just talked about all the stuff they have to learn in that time period: grammar and vocabulary and basic dates and people in U.S. and world history, tons of stuff that we expect them to learn from somewhere around first grade through sixth grade. So they have to be industrious during this time. They have to have some sense that they are capable in this time. Otherwise, they're going to run into problems with the next one, which is coming up on the next slide. All right, so these stages, you're going to notice, are not age-bound. The earlier ones were age-bound. In this complicated world that we have now, we might be doing stage 5, 6, and 7 all together at the same time at some point. Traditionally, we'll go through stage 5, but then we might do it again. We might be going to school and having children and families. We might never have a middle adulthood and get people out of our house. We're not necessarily living in Erickson's time. In Erickson's time, you would graduate from high school with a job, and you would do that job until you were 65 and retired. You would have your children very early. You would raise your children. So you would do this very quickly: gain identity, form a family, get your family out of your house and have grandkids, and then live to a nice, fruitful old age and die with integrity. But it's a little more complicated now. But we still do all of these things at some point in our lives. We have to figure out who we are. Adolescence is the typical time during high school when you kind of try on different personas and decide what you like and don't like. And eventually, maybe you'll figure out what you want to do. My kid in college is a sophomore on her 5th major. So hopefully someday, but you have to get this identity so that you can focus and not be confused about what you're going to do with the rest of your life. It gives you some sort of focus and motivation. And then in young adulthood, which can sometimes be happening at the same time as you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, you're also making friend groups and couples in this young adulthood, perhaps raising young children in this young adulthood. Not always getting married and raising young children, but somehow interacting with others and forming close bonds to people. In middle adulthood, you're starting to retire and step back from your busyness a little bit, but he doesn't want you to be that old guy who sits on his front porch and tells people to get off his lawn. He wants you in the world. He wants you doing something like reading to helping kindergartners learn how to read, volunteering, doing something, making a tiny little difference, being in the world instead of being self-absorbed. And then old age, this is assuming that you get to live to a ripe old age and die peacefully in your sleep, surrounded by your family and friends. You can look back on your life and die with integrity rather than despair. And he's not really looking for Nobel Prize winning or anything. He's just kind of saying that as you live in the world, as you interact with people, and go from stage to stage to stage to stage in a positive manner, you'll get there. There's nothing dramatic that you have to do at old age besides look back at all that you have created and be okay with it, because you tutored kindergartners, maybe you fostered some kittens, maybe you raised your own children and now you have grandchildren. It's not anything dramatic. It's just being in the world and continuing to contribute and to interact and contribute some more all the way up until the last moment.